The fire on Rustic Hill Drive, a quiet town's nightmare. They thought it was just a house fire. But the body inside wasn't killed by flames. It was killed by love, obsession, and antifreeze. Iberia, Missouri, a rural town nestled in the shadow of the Ozarks. Fewer than 1,000 people live here. It's the kind of place where everybody knows your name, your dog, and your weekend plans. When flames lit up the night sky over Rustic Hill Drive in the early hours of December 11, 2018, the town woke up terrified. It wasn't a brush fire. It wasn't a barn. It was the home of Amy and Joshua Murray. The blaze devoured the structure with unrelenting force. When the fire department finally got the inferno under control, they discovered something much worse than a destroyed home. They found a body. It was Joshua Murray, 37 years old, a loving father, a hardworking man, burned beyond recognition in his bedroom. Amy, his wife, was outside, shivering and crying. She told investigators she had left to grab McDonald's with her 11-year-old son and came back to see their home engulfed. That was the story, at first. But the thing about small towns, secrets don't stay buried. And when detectives started pulling at the threads, the story Amy told started unraveling. Fast. It began with a sandwich and ended with a death row inmate. Because this wasn't just a fire. This was murder, cold, calculated, and straight from the twisted depths of obsession. The woman behind the fire, Amy Murray, nurse and wife. Amy Murray wasn't the kind of person you'd expect to find at the center of a murder investigation. She was a registered nurse, middle-aged, soft-spoken, mother to a boy who adored her, and wife to a man who'd worked himself to the bone to provide for his family. Day, Amy worked at Jefferson City Correctional Center, a maximum security prison 30 minutes north. She administered medications, monitored inmates' vitals, and filed paperwork like any other nurse in the prison system. But behind the sterile hallways and locked doors, something darker was brewing. Amy had started an inappropriate relationship with one of the inmates, Eugene Claypool, a man serving a life sentence for stabbing a 72-year-old disabled man to death during a robbery. Claypool wasn't just a convict. He was manipulative, charming, and had a violent past that was buried behind a calm smile. And Amy? She fell for him. She was drawn in by his letters, his voice on the prison phones, his flattery. She began seeing him more frequently, staying late at work, taking extra shifts, and eventually crossing every ethical and legal boundary in the book. The two began exchanging deeply intimate calls. Recorded calls. Once the prison system was kept for security, calls where Amy spilled her soul. And when investigators would later listen to those calls, they wouldn't believe what they heard: a premeditated goodbye, Amy's plan to be with her prison lover. The relationship between Amy and Eugene was more than just inappropriate. It was delusional. In her mind, he wasn't a murderer anymore. He was her soulmate. But there was a problem. Her husband. According to the call logs, Amy told Claypool she wanted to be with him, that her husband was in the way, and that she couldn't wait until he was gone. Those calls, recorded over weeks, were damning. And they weren't subtle. At one point, Amy told Eugene, "I can't wait until he's out of the picture. Then we can be together. We can be married." She wasn't joking. Investigators would later piece together that Amy had started planning Joshua's death weeks in advance. She did her research, not on guns, not on knives, but on poison. She learned that ethylene glycol, a chemical found in antifreeze, was tasteless, deadly, and hard to detect in the early stages of poisoning. It was a silent killer, and Amy was ready to use it. Poison in the kitchen. The murder of Joshua Murray. The autopsy would later reveal the horrifying truth. Joshua Murray was dead before the fire ever started. Toxicology tests showed fatal levels of ethylene glycol in his system. His lungs weren't burned. His airways weren't sung, meaning he was already dead when the flames reached him. And the fire? It was just a cover-up. Amy had poisoned her husband, likely by slipping antifreeze into his food or drink. Slowly, over time, Joshua had become lethargic, sick, and weak. Then, finally, unconscious on the night of December 10th, after her son went to bed, Amy gave him one final dose. Then, she set the house on fire. Investigators found an accelerant in the bedroom, right where Joshua's body had been. Fire marshals said the blaze was intentional. It was arson, but Amy wasn't careful enough. There were inconsistencies in her story. The timestamp on the McDonald's receipt showed she and her son bought food hours earlier than she claimed. And security footage showed them arriving home around 11:48 p.m. She said the fire started after they left. Phone records showed otherwise. Amy had been inside the house just minutes before the fire started, and the fire wasn't random. It had a purpose: destroy the evidence. But it didn't work, because now the truth was coming out. Arrest and revelation. The walls closed in February 2019. 2 months after the fire, Amy Murray was arrested. The charges were staggering. First degree murder, armed criminal action, arson, tampering with physical evidence. She was held on a $750,000 bond. The small town of Iberia was stunned. A nurse, a mother, a wife, now accused of poisoning her husband to be with a murderer during interrogation. Amy tried to maintain her innocence, but the evidence was a mountain. Phone calls, surveillance footage, autopsy reports, fire marshal statements. There was no getting around it. Still, Amy denied everything. She spent 6 years battling the charges, bouncing between court hearings, pretrial conferences, and jail time. And then, just when it seemed the trial was finally going to begin, she took a deal: the Alford plea. Guilt without admission. In June 2025, Amy Murray entered what's known as an Alford plea. Under this rare legal maneuver, she did not admit guilt but acknowledged that prosecutors had enough evidence to convict her of murder. It was a way to avoid a full trial and possibly a life sentence. Instead, she received 12 years for second-degree murder, 7 years for arson, 4 years for tampering with evidence. All sentences would run concurrently, meaning she'd serve them at the same time. A total of 12 years behind bars. Some called it a victory. Others called it a disgrace. Joshua's family didn't hold back. His aunt, Sherry Thompson, said, "She took away a father, a husband, and a good man. All for what? A killer in prison? Justice was served." Or was it inmate love? The dangerous psychology behind prison affairs. Amy's case isn't isolated. Dozens of prison staff across the U.S. have been caught in similar scandals. Romances with inmates that spiral out of control. Psychologists call it hybristophilia, an attraction to people who commit violent crimes. And in closed, emotionally charged environments like prisons, the boundaries can blur. Inmates manipulate. Staff fall under their spell. In Amy's case, the combination of loneliness, emotional vulnerability, and exposure to a charismatic murderer became a deadly cocktail. But there's no excuse for what she did. She poisoned the father of her child. She burned his body. And she did it all to be with a killer. A killer who, by the way, is still behind bars, and who, according to prison officials, has had no intention of marrying Amy since her arrest. The aftermath: a son left behind, lost in the headlines, was the person most devastated by this tragedy. Amy and Joshua's 11-year-old son. The boy had spent the night of the murder with his mother. He'd eaten the same food, walked through the house, left with her for fast food. And while his father lay dying, while the fire consumed their home, he was in the back seat of a car, sipping soda, thinking about bedtime. He has to live with that memory forever. The courts placed him in the custody of family members. His life changed overnight, from normalcy to trauma, from innocence to headlines. What happened that night shattered more than one life. It tore a family apart. Final thoughts. A crime of cold obsession. The case of Amy Murray is a modern Greek tragedy. A woman drawn to darkness, who believed in the fantasy of forbidden love and destroyed her entire world to chase it. Joshua Murray never saw it coming that he loved his wife, worked hard, took care of his son, and in the end, his own home, his own wife, became the weapon. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a crime of calculation. Amy Murray thought she could outsmart the system, but in the end, she couldn't outrun the truth. Voices from the ashes. The community reacts. The fire may have gone out, but in Iberia, Missouri, the smoke never really cleared. In the days after Amy Murray's arrest, locals gathered at the charred remains of the Murray home. Some left flowers. Others just stood and stared, trying to process the horror that had unfolded in their quiet neighborhood. Reverend Alton Myers, who had baptized Joshua and Amy's son just a year earlier, addressed his congregation with trembling hands. This wasn't just a murder. This was a betrayal of everything we thought we knew. A woman we trusted, who cared for our sick, turned out to be living a lie. Neighbors recalled Joshua as a kind man. Quiet, reserved, but dependable. One neighbor, Marcia Redding, told local reporters, "He shoveled my driveway every winter, even when I didn't ask. He was one of the good ones." That woman, she smiled at us like everything was fine. Amy's actions rippled through the community like a slow-moving earthquake. Churches held prayer circles. Schools invited counselors. People questioned themselves. How could no one have seen it coming? But behind closed doors, whispers turned to outrage. What broke many townspeople most wasn't just the act itself, but why did she do it? She killed him to be with an inmate. One who murdered an old man? Another local woman said, her voice shaking. It's not just evil, it's sick. And yet, there was one person everyone worried about the most. The child, a boy with no parents. The forgotten victim in every tragic story. There's someone the headlines forget. For this case, it was the Mai's 11-year-old son. The boy, whose name has been kept confidential for protection, not only lost his father to murder, he also lost his mother to the justice system. In the span of 24 hours, his family was obliterated. According to court records, he was placed in the care of Joshua's relatives after Amy's arrest. Therapists were brought in. Social workers tried to ensure his transition was stable. But the trauma was already written. He was there that night. He sat in the car as the house burned behind him. He remembered his dad lying on the couch earlier, saying he felt dizzy. He remembered his mom saying they were going to run out real quick. He would later tell a child psychologist, "I didn't know he was dying. I thought he was just tired." The guilt wasn't his, but the scars were that he'll grow up knowing his mother killed his father. He'll grow up knowing the home he once slept in became his father's tomb. And he'll grow up answering questions he never asked for. The inmate. Who is Eugene Claypool? Let's talk about the man at the center of Amy's deadly obsession. Eugene Claypool. In 2000, Claypool was convicted of second-degree murder for the brutal stabbing of Donald Lehman, a 72-year-old disabled man. Claypool had broken into Lehman's home to rob him, but things escalated. Lehman, who used a walker and lived alone, was found with over a dozen stab wounds. Claypool was arrested days later after pawning stolen goods. He was 24 when he was sent to Jefferson City Correctional Center, the same prison Amy would one day work in. He was sentenced to life in prison, with no chance of parole until 2044. But inside those concrete walls, Claypool found a way to manipulate people, especially women. He had a history of grooming female staff. Internal reports later revealed that Amy wasn't the first nurse he'd gotten close to, just the one who went furthest. Claypool knew how to play the game. He used emotional hooks. He mirrored his target's pain, that he made them feel seen in a way they hadn't for years. Amy, lonely and emotionally vulnerable, was the perfect target. Their relationship bloomed through recorded phone calls and smuggled letters. At one point, Amy even opened a secret bank account and deposited funds under Claypool's name. One call, released in court records, includes Amy saying, "I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. When this is over, it'll just be us." Claypool responded, "I promise, baby, I'll make it all worth it." But since Amy's arrest, Claypool has refused to communicate with her. He has not visited. He has not written. He has moved on, leaving Amy alone with the ashes of her crime. Anatomy of a psychopath. What made Amy snap? Psychologists who later reviewed Amy Murray's behavior pointed to a disturbing combination of factors. 1. Emotional vulnerability. After years of caregiving and working long shifts, Amy's marriage reportedly lacked intimacy. Friends said she often felt unappreciated, not unloved, but invisible. 2. Workplace dynamics. Prisons, especially underfunded ones, foster emotional bonds between staff and inmates due to close, daily contact and blurred professional lines. 3. Hybristophilia, a condition where individuals are attracted to people who commit heinous crimes, often seen in women who form relationships with death row inmates or serial killers. It's not about morality. It's about control, danger, and the illusion of deep connection. 4. Delusion. Amy likely built a fantasy world around Eugene. She imagined a life outside prison walls, with the inmate becoming her husband, her protector, even a stepfather to her son. But none of it was real. Instead of facing her reality and leaving her marriage, she chose to eliminate the one person standing in the way. not through divorce, but through murder. The legal fallout, systemic failures exposed after Amy's arrest, the Missouri Department of Corrections launched an internal investigation. The question was chilling. How did a nurse, licensed professional, manage to conduct a full-blown romantic relationship with an inmate convicted of murder? Findings showed security protocols were weak, staff monitoring was inconsistent, phone calls between inmates and staff weren't flagged fast enough. 3 other staff members at Jefferson City Correctional Center were quietly reassigned or terminated due to unrelated inappropriate behavior. State Senator Troy Schroeder called for reform, saying, "This was a breakdown at every level. We let a fox live in the henhouse, and it cost a man his life." In response, Missouri prisons began implementing stricter call monitoring, random staff screenings, enhanced boundaries training for staff/inmate relations, but for many, it was too little, too late. Joshua was gone. Final days, final thoughts. Amy's life in prison today. Amy Murray sits behind bars at the Women's Eastern Reception, Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Vandalia, Missouri. She does not speak to the media. She does not receive visits from Claypool, and she has filed no appeals. Inmates who've served time with Amy describe her as quiet, reclusive, and regretful. One former cellmate, speaking anonymously, said, "She doesn't cry much anymore, but you can tell she's haunted. She doesn't talk about the fire. She doesn't talk about her husband. She just folds laundry and keeps her head down. Every once in a while, she asks about her son, and that's when the tears come. Because in the end, Amy didn't just destroy her marriage or take a life. She shattered her own." Epilogue. A story that should never be forgotten. Joshua Murray didn't make the news while he was alive. He wasn't rich or famous or powerful. He was a man who worked hard, loved his son, trusted his wife, and in the end, paid the price for someone else's obsession. Amy Murray's case is a chilling reminder of how love, when twisted by fantasy and desperation, can become lethal. It reminds us that predators don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes they wear scrubs. That evil can wear the face of a mother, a caregiver, a neighbor, and that justice, though delayed, does eventually arrive. For now, the prison nurse who killed for love serves her time in silence. But for those she left behind, especially a now teenage boy, the sentence will never truly end. And if you find this story chilling and heartbreaking, make sure to subscribe for more real-life true crime cases that go beyond the headlines. Because sometimes the scariest monsters live inside the people we think we know best.